The Clockwork Paradox. James Weaver had never been particularly fond of science fiction, but when a strange invitation appeared in his inbox, promising a revolutionary experiment involving time travel, he couldn't resist the temptation. The email was brief and unsettling, a cryptic message simply reading, "We can offer you a glimpse of the future, a future that you will shape." At first, he thought it was a scam. However, the intrigue gnawed at him, pulling him into a whirlwind of curiosity. After a series of encrypted communications, James found himself standing at the entrance of a hidden laboratory beneath the city. The building looked abandoned from the outside, but inside, the hum of high-tech machinery filled the air. A tall, gaunt scientist with eyes that gleamed with unnatural intensity greeted him. "Welcome, Mr. Weaver," the scientist said. "You've been chosen to witness the future. Not just any future, your future. But beware, you may not return the same." James felt a chill crawl up his spine, but, driven by a sense of adventure, he nodded and followed the scientist to a metallic chamber at the center of the lab. The time machine stood there, an intricate device of gears, wires, and glowing screens. The scientist explained that James would travel just a few decades ahead, enough time to see the changes his actions could bring. Without further hesitation, James stepped into the machine. The door sealed behind him, and the whir of the gears became deafening. The air crackled, and then, as if pulled by an unseen force, his body was hurled through time. When the world around him stopped spinning, James found himself standing in the middle of a desolate, dystopian city. Towering skyscrapers cast long, ominous shadows across the cracked pavement. The streets were empty, save for a few hunched figures who moved with an unsettling, mechanical precision. The air smelled of burning metal and decay. Confused, James wandered through the city, searching for some sign of life. It didn't take long before he encountered something that would haunt him forever. A large, towering figure, its body a grotesque amalgamation of human and machine. It lumbered toward him, its mechanical limbs scraping the ground with a screeching sound. The thing's eyes glowed a sickly green, and its voice, distorted and metallic, rasped through the air. "Do you know who we are?" it croaked. James's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped back, his mind racing to process the scene. What? What are you?" "We are the result of choices, the choices you will make. The future is not kind to those who act without understanding the consequences." The figure lurched closer, its voice growing more menacing. "You are already part of this future. Everything you do shapes what happens here." A wave of panic swept over James. He turned and ran, his breath shallow as the mechanical creature's footsteps echoed behind him. He didn't understand. What did it mean? What had he done? After what felt like an eternity of running through the decaying city, James stumbled upon a decrepit building that seemed out of place. Inside, he found a group of people, humans who were still alive, but barely. Their bodies were frail, their faces gaunt, and their eyes filled with fear. They whispered in hushed tones, speaking of the chosen ones who were responsible for the world's collapse. "Did you come to help us?" one woman asked, her voice shaky. I I don't know," James stammered. "I was just here to see the future." The woman shook her head. "The future you see is not the end. It's only a possibility, a future that can still be changed. But you have to make the right choice. We have waited for someone like you." James's mind raced. The future was a nightmare, but it wasn't set in stone. The decisions he made, no matter how small, could lead to this devastation. But how could he fix it? What could one person do against such a dark fate? Before he could ask any more questions, the sky above him cracked open with an eerie sound, and he was swept away by a sudden gust of wind. The machine was calling him back. James awoke in the laboratory, his body shaking with the aftershocks of his journey. The scientist stood before him, watching him intently. "You've seen it, haven't you?" the scientist asked, his voice low and knowing. James nodded, his mind still grappling with the horrors he had witnessed. How do I change it? How do I stop it from happening? The scientist's lips curled into a faint smile. The future is malleable, but every action has a consequence. You must choose carefully. Act with intention. James returned to his old life, but something had shifted within him. The choices he made now felt different. He no longer took them lightly. His actions, whether they seemed insignificant or monumental, had meaning. He started small, volunteering at local shelters, speaking out for causes he believed in, and being more present for the people he loved. But over time, he noticed a change in the world around him. The dark, decaying future he had glimpsed began to fade. People became more connected, technology advanced for the better, and the world seemed to thrive. It was as if the small, good choices he made had altered the course of history, sparing humanity from the dreadful fate he had seen. One evening, as James sat at a coffee shop, watching the city bustle with life, he smiled to himself. He had changed the future, and in doing so, he had saved it. But somewhere deep within him, he knew that the future was still fragile. It could slip through his fingers at any moment. And so he continued to make the right choices, hoping that the world he had helped build would endure. But as he glanced at the clock, a strange feeling washed over him. He could have sworn he saw a flicker, a brief, unsettling image of that mechanical creature, staring at him from the future. Perhaps the past was not as easy to escape as he had hoped.